Coogs House. That was a bummer of a day to start and finish. I guess there's something fun in the middle. We got a lot to get into.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Cougs Cougars After Dark podcast. I'm your host, Parker Ainsworth, and we're going to do our best to break down all things Houston Cougars. Before we get too far, we do want to acknowledge and send our thoughts, prayers, anything you want to send their way to the families of DJ Hayden, Zach McMillan, and Ralph Oregwu, who all passed away, former Houston Cougar football players who all passed away in a car accident where the other driver, the car driving the other car, was a drunk driver on Friday night. The trio and another teammate were all hanging out together. It seems like car struck them. 3 of them died. Sad day if these Cougars start the day. It was really rough news to start the day. Obviously, we're sending all thoughts and prayers that way. We're going to do our best tonight to talk some about Houston Cougar football and basketball in a way that, honestly is a little bit distracting, somewhat intentionally. I didn't want to get past and act like that didn't happen. It's a really rough day for all people tied to the university. And so I'm sorry that, I'm starting on a sour note, but frankly, the day started on a much, much more sour note, right? And so that's the way that goes. Now, we're going to, again, do our best to talk about football and basketball today that happened today in a way that, again, serves hopefully as a distraction or some piece of solace or just something else to think about. I guess that's a distraction, Parker. Anyway, I wish I had better things to start to talk about. We are going to talk about the football game, even though it did just happen, did not go our way. I see a lot of comments, a very similar vein in the comment section. We'll talk about some of that stuff as well. And then I want to talk some about the where we go from here. In that section, I'll probably talk some about basketball because, frankly, that might be where we go from here. If you know me, you know I like talking about hoops. And so we'll try to get some of that as we go. Now, what just happened is coming in, they were 4-5 Houston Cougars. Lost to the coming in 2-7 Cincinnati Bearcats. Cincinnati had lost 7 games in a row, had not won a Big 12 game, had served as several other teams' first Big 12 victory. Houston was favored by 2.5 points at home. We found out before the game Matthew Golden would not play. We also found out before the game that Malik Fleming would not play. I think it's safe to say that they would have made some difference. I'm not saying that they would not have, but there were opportunities to play better in this game given even with them out. Now, Cincinnati did score first in the first quarter. Houston responded in the second with an early second quarter touchdown, and then quickly gave up an ensuing touchdown to that same running game of Cincinnati. I say that all happened in the first half because Cincinnati scored their second touchdown at the 8-minute mark in the second quarter because it felt like, frankly, after that, Cincinnati kind of went prevent defense, like, hey, chip away at us, see what happens. And Houston flat couldn't do it. It was an abysmal day. I don't have drop numbers in front of me, but I can think of 5 or 6 different times specifically where balls hit off of Houston Cougars' shoulder pads and hands and went up in the air. A couple did come down as interceptions. Not great. Probably, if we're being honest, one of Donovan Smith's worst games as Houston Cougar quarterback. And that's not to say, he had some great ones so far this year. So I'm not saying that he can't play well. He just didn't, right? 16 of 18 for 102 yards, 2 touchdowns and 3 picks. That's bad. That's just bad, right? And at the end of the day, right, especially when you're missing your biggest and best playmaker on the outside, the guy that bends defense on the outside, you kind of need that position to step up and play well. Parker Jenkins had 50 yards and 8 carries. He had a couple of really big bursty runs that, again, I tweet out all the time. He needs to get the ball more. 8 carries. The guy had, I don't think he had a catch, right? So he had 8 touches. Parker Jenkins had 1 catch. So he had 9 touches in the game. I don't understand how he doesn't have 15 a game. They can get him the ball out of the backfield, pass that kind of stuff, et cetera. But they did not. Donovan Smith was kind of the bulk of the running game on Saturday night. Frankly, improvised runs at that, not even necessarily called runs all the time. Just had to go making something happen. It was interesting. It looked like Houston had trouble creating separation on the outside offensively. And then, like we said, in traffic and in contested catch situations, ball bounced up high in the air. And it felt like the advantage Houston had was speed, and Cincinnati was really, really comfortable keeping everyone and everything in front. Now, I think the inverse of this is that what is fascinating to me is that Houston did not look ready for the Cincinnati offense either for stretches of this game. Cincinnati, I guess you could say they only scored 3 touchdowns, right? And I guess in some ways that's fair. They controlled the game. They had the ball for 37 minutes nearly. At one point, the time of possession clock was 30 minutes and 33 seconds for Cincinnati and 15 minutes and 13 seconds for Houston. I'm not great at math, but that's more than double the amount of time possession for Cincinnati. And so while you could argue that they didn't score as much as they might have hoped to, I think it's safe to say Cincinnati's offense is exactly what they wanted it to do, and that is keep the ball out of the hands of Houston, keep the ball away from Houston's speed, and to, frankly, get 3 yards, 4 yards in cloud. That's where they wanted to, and then occasionally pop off with a 60-yard run for good measure. Now, on the whole, I think it becomes very apparent in this game that Houston did not look ready or prepared. And I say that to say that we've seen Houston do this before. I saw people commenting the interesting thing about Houston Cougar football is there's a real discussion as to what is the worst loss of the year. And that's content I typically get to after the season's over once we have a more set look at what those things are. But in several games, you've had Houston had a half, right, where they didn't look good. Like, the first almost half against Rice, more or less the first half against Rice, didn't look like the offense came to play, right? The second half against TCU, where were we? The second half against Texas Tech, where were we? Right? First quarter against Texas, I'd argue for most of, if not all of the game, Kansas State, where were we? Right? Cincinnati tonight, it felt like that was. It felt like it was honestly offensively where were we the whole game, and I feel like that the defense kind of took the first 4 quarters off. It felt like the defense was not engaged at the start and then gassed out by the end, right? And that same thing, we're playing a half football here and a half football there, obviously doesn't really work against anyone, but it's clearly not going to work against Big 12 competition, the buzzwords that are Big 12 competition. I tweeted out, I think my last tweet I just sent out before coming on to this, setting this up, was that Dana Holgorsen made the comment very quickly. It started his post game off that Big 12 football is hard or something to that effect. He said to Jeremy Branham, the Big 12 football is hard. Big 12 football is absolutely hard. Here's the problem, and here's the reason that is particularly bogus on a night like tonight. That isn't Big 12 football, period. They are coming at the exact same rate you are, from the exact same conference you are, and they're waxing your butt the same way they did 2 years ago with a new coach, a mostly new roster. They said they had 11 starters on both sides of the ball that had not played a game for Cincinnati yet, or not started a game for Cincinnati yet. Right? That's not Big 12 football. So Big 12 football is absolutely hard. Playing Texas, Oklahoma, frankly, Oklahoma State next week, Kansas State. Like, there are good teams in the conference. That was not what happened on Saturday. Full stop. And that's why it's particularly bogus, and why it really, if you can't tell, irks me a little bit that that's the thing said. Were they a good football team? I think they're better than we realized, right? I talk myself every Friday that we're going to win on Saturday, and then obviously now 6 of them we have not, right? And I could go back and look at like where I overlooked this, overlooked that, where I can see how that could happen when a team is 2-7 and they're hungry for a win. They needed this one and they're hungrier, and that's a problem, and this and that. But at the end of the day, saying that you lost that game because Big 12 football grinds me up, because that is just not the case. Now, I do want to talk about building a well-oiled machine, or a better oiled machine. But in doing that, I want to talk a little bit about how to work on your well-oiled machine. Is that a transition? We'll call it a transition 2. Talking about eBay Motors, because eBay Motors, you can get all the right things to fix up your ride or die. Passion, drive, and patience are what brings home the winning trophy, which you did not have much of tonight. And it's also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance from superpowers, superchargers. Superpowers might be what we need. Roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because the eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, because you need to save that cash to donate to particular issues in the school. Maybe with all parts you need, the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusive supply. eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Now, I want to talk some about the offense in particular. And I say the offense in particular because, frankly, big picture, Cincinnati's offensive numbers themselves, even though they have an abysmal record coming into this game, were strong, and they were a really good running team. And we know, just watching Houston play this year, you could have guessed, I guessed, Houston was going to give up some touchdowns on the ground because they have all year, right? I was predicting a higher scoring game, teams closer to in the 30s, right? Clearly that didn't happen. I don't think Cincinnati wanted to score in the 30s. I think if they wanted to, they probably could have. And instead, we got a 24-14 snooze fest on offense. Now, I don't have drop numbers in front of me, and I would have to go back and go through and watch like which exactly were drops and which were errant throws, and that's somewhat of a judgment call. But there were a number of times where the ball was thrown at Houston Cougar and it hit them in the shoulder, the chest, the stomach, the hand, and popped up in the air, popped down to the dirt. Some of the ones that popped up in the air went on to be interceptions, right? That feels like lack of focus, not mentally into the game, not something like you're worried about the next play, you're worried about the wrong things. And so I could see how some would tie that into coaching. I will say, while I'm frustrated clearly with a lot of the things that went on the coaching side of things on Saturday night, that's a thing I'd actually say, like, no, you got to catch the ball, right? A lot of those things I think you got to catch the ball. I do think that it felt like Donovan Smith was throwing into crowded areas a whole heck of a lot. And I was baffled by that in particular because it looked like to me that on the snap of the football, by the second step you've read pass, typically Cincinnati, after that middle of the second quarter, once they had scored their second touchdown, they were bailing. I mean, they were backing out. They're trying to keep Houston's speed in front of them. And in doing that, and maybe I'll see on a rewatch, because I will rewatch each game before talking about it the course of the week and trying to get ready for things like that, right? In doing that, I do think, to be fair, that was respect for Houston's speed, right? Okay, we can't let Sam Brown get loose over the top. He does that to everyone. We got to keep him in front of us, right? But what's interesting to me is they're able to do that and be on top of every receiver, right? I don't understand how that ends up happening, right? If they're backed out, you should be able to hit the guy underneath without having to worry about catch the ball in traffic. We still aren't creating a whole lot of separation there. And I frankly feel like we've got talent and speed to do it. And so I don't know necessarily why that is. And maybe I'm misjudging it. Maybe I'm completely off. Maybe we don't have, as Houston Cougars, the team speed I thought we did, right? Frankly, the two times we ran a little short, 3-yard drag routes across the field in a mesh, we ran, over the top concept to clear the backside and then hopefully just outrun the guy covering us underneath it. Both to Sam Brown, both times it gets hawked down by the guy trailing him. Maybe I'm wrong on what I'm guessing there, but what I don't think I'm wrong about is that it is now, we played 10 football games this season, and we're still asking the basic question of like, why we have this talented receiver room. Dana called it the best he's ever had. And he had a lot of pro receivers, right? And I think he's frankly right in a raw talent perspective. But if this is the best receiver room he's ever had, why aren't they open? Why aren't they open? Right? Like at the end of the day, why aren't they open? And if they're not open, it's, play calling. Is it route running? Is it effort? Like, where do those things come into play? Because I think they are talented and they're not open. That said, this is first watch live. We're talking about it less than 45 minutes of the game's over, right? So maybe on second watch, I'll see something differently. But is Donovan Smith also forcing the ball into particularly covered areas at times? Didn't feel like that was always the case, but frankly, for a guy that we've seen complete 80% of his passes earlier was that last week? God, that was just last week. And tonight for him to go 16-28, like, makes you wonder, like, wait a second, that's a very different game, especially when you go 16-28 and throw 3 picks in it, right? Suddenly you're looking like, wait a second here, putting, crossing the T's, dotting the I's. What's the difference? Why are we forcing the ball a little bit more against that team of all people, especially that team that had such a weak back end of the secondary? Now, I don't mean to dismiss the defense at all or say that there were no flaws in the defense at all. I do think we've struggled with the run all year, so I wasn't particularly surprised. I do think that losing Dot Nwankwo early, and if Dot, I know if Dot, if you're hearing this, I hope you're doing okay. It looked like a bad injury live, and I hope it's not as bad as it looked live. I hope you're all right, man. Missing him hurt a lot. Now, Holmes stepped in some. Jamar Caldwell picked up the slack some. Nelson Caesar got his big sack and a 4th down stop because he's a pro, right? Like, those guys did step up and play well in his absence, but having Dot, I think, would have helped some along the way too. All that is to say that the defense, I think, while Cincinnati had a strong offensive game, I think the defense did about as I expected. And the reason I'm hitting the offense so hard is because it's not what I expect. I see some of y'all are commenting as I'm talking. Pocket Sand says exactly, this team does have talent. David Bridgewater says, I just don't get why this offense feels so vanilla. And what's frankly, vanilla is an interesting word on that, because I also feel like we don't do crazy simple things, but I'm also not asking for a bunch of double reverses and trick plays, right? I'm asking for guys in space, getting guys into space and letting them work after that. And so vanilla, like some people say vanilla because they want to see orbit motions, or they want to see, double pat. They want to see a fun, tricky, not a trick, but like fun gadgety kind of stuff. I don't know that I want to see gadgets right now. I just want to see good football on offense, right? So that's the big difference to me when I say the word here. See the word vanilla. John Peterson said there was no sense of urgency second half play. There was going to be 5 quarters. Woke up and it was over. I think we might have needed more than 5. Hail Caesars. Nell Caesar did play well. Talking about the defense, Dave Bridgewater also added that next week is going to be brutal when Ollie Gordon comes to town, and he's right. That guy's a really good running back. He is really good at running the football. There we go. But to be fair, like, part of the reason I wasn't so didn't think that had to be a loss today was because West Virginia came in as a very strong running attack as well, and I understand that we wanted a Hail Mary, but we were also up like 30 seconds before that too, right? So I saw that as like, okay, we can find a way to win anyway. Not to say that they weren't going to give up yards, but and so we'll see. Again, I talk myself into a win by every Friday. So I'm sure by next Friday we're going to talk myself into beating Oklahoma State because I'm going to watch the UCF blow them out. It's like, oh, we can just do that, right? We'll see. Lots to talk about coaching. I've given my 2 cents on a previous to go back in the catalog on that one. I don't think he's gone at the end of the year, folks. I think I make some major change-ups. The offense clearly needs coordination. There's a lack of coordination on the offense. There needs to be an offensive coordinator to have some sort of identity and direction. And I don't care if that is Dana. There just needs to be someone in charge of it, and there is not, and it is painfully obvious. And I think that that's there. Defensively, I could see also making a change. Again, while I'm saying they didn't play any worse than I would have thought they would of tonight, because that's a good running team over there, there have been times this season where I would not have said that, right? And so I could see how someone would say, like, make changes over there. I just don't think it's the boss man. Rusty always chimes in with lengthy things, but I love Rusty. And I love the passion Rusty brings. Utter incompetence offensively and defensively to bury Dana's label as an offensive genius. 14 points against Cincinnati. I think that makes that fair. U of H is going to finish off the worst record between the newbies head-to-head. I guess technically, so we didn't play BYU. We're 0-for against Cincy. And I guess we got to play Central Florida in 2 weeks. So I guess that is still up in the air, right? We weren't going to go undefeated against all of them. I don't know a whole lot about that. John Peterson talks about moving on from a debacle. Before we get to that and answer John's question, or look at John's question at all, I do want to talk some about break in case of emergency kind of situations, Not that Houston would ever be in one of those break in case of emergency type of situations with things like who's doing what with the football program. But we spent a lot of time talking together, and I know that like everyone runs into these things. They're going to need some sort of like medical emergency, something in their house. What do they have at their house? And with that said, one great place to be ready for those kinds of situations that you don't ever want to happen, but you want to be ready if they do happen, is Jace Medical. You can go to online right now at jacemedical.com and get a 12-month supply of your daily medications. You can use code LOCKED ON at checkout for a discount as well. Now, people say all kinds of things about it, but people also really talk about like getting a preset box. You can get the Jace case at your house, ready for all kinds of situations with all kinds of different medications for you and your loved ones just to have on deck, just in case one of those kind of viruses outbreaks at your house. Go to jacemedical.com. Use code LOCKED ON for $20 off, and that's jacemedical.com. Be prepared. Now, I say all that to say, and I'll go back to this comment a second ago, that a couple people are tying into what I want to say next. John asked what he'd do to move on from such a debacle. Obviously, next week being the last home game, he asked about who would attend. Next week's the last home game is Oklahoma State. I think there are some people that will go because, frankly, there's some people that go because they go to every game. I think there'll be some people that go because it's the last chance to go to a game. I think there are some people that go because it's something to do, and I imagine the tickets get pretty cheap by the time the game comes around. Go to Gametime.com, use the Gametime app, Gametime.co, and use the Gametime app if you need tickets. I will say that attendance for this season is a 1 week left kind of problem. Attendance for future seasons is where you start to say, okay, we have to find ways to drum up excitement between a week from today and next fall. That's enthusiasm around the spring, enthusiasm around signing day, enthusiasm around transfer portal, enthusiasm around hires, and those kinds of things. And so on and so forth. As far as hires go, people continue to comment this, and I don't mean to just be so dismissive of it, but, asking about hiring and firing and Holgorsen and this and that. My stance continues to be that nothing happens to him until winter of 24 at the earliest. I think what you're looking at is shakeups throughout the rest of the coaching staff, fairly high-profile positions, including hiring a freaking offensive coordinator. And seeing if that rights the ship at all, because there is talent on the roster, there's talent in that city, there's talent all over the state of Texas, and it needs to be pulled in, it needs to be used appropriately. I think that's the way that goes, because I outlined a previous episode, and go back to catalog because I got more into the details and the numbers, but basically firing Dana Holgorsen and then hiring a Big 12 competent coach at a Big 12 competent salary would equate to paying a Nick Saban type salary, and because you got to do it at the same time. And I think the deal there is that, like, can you afford that in this current moment? Because you wouldn't be paying. It's not like you get Nick Saban out of that. You'd be paying his salary to someone who's making a lot less. Anyway, let's talk about tonight's game, because that's not as. I don't know. Maybe it is. Truthfully, though, I think the big deal to me is that this offense continues to stall. I want to do at some point when we have the season to look back at how many bad halves of offense did we play. And I've kind of got a running number of that. I was thinking stretches of football games. GoCoogs.com, I thought did a very clever job of turning into just halves of football games. Because I was trying to think about, like, do you think about like minutes of time of possession and that kind of stuff? That's really complicated, really fast, because then you got to, when you get the ball, when you turn the ball, right? I would say both halves qualify from today, is a long story short, right? Both halves. Touchdown early, touchdown late, but the late one kind of feels like a garbage time touchdown. Touchdown early feels like they just hadn't figured out what you're doing yet. I will say, if that's the offense without Matthew Golden in it, Houston's got a whole heck of a lot of problems coming up. Whole heck of a lot of problems. Now, David Bridgewater points out, it is at least basketball season very, very soon. It is basketball season very, very soon. Houston did have a big basketball win over Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Frankly, A&M Corpus Christi showed up in a way that started the game off very, very well. That was at 12:30 on Saturday as well, so we're going to cover that tonight some too. I love basketball. I got my basketball sweatshirt on, actually. I love basketball season, not just because Houston is good at it. I think it's a beautiful game. I think it's a great combination of, like, strategy and X's and O's and excellence in that aspect, as well as just letting dudes compete and make plays and be athletic. I think it's a great combination of the two. It's got great creativity, and I love basketball. I will say Houston being good at it is a really good bonus. Now, Houston started off the game slow. I think 12:30 felt like an early start for them. And frankly, I think Texas A&M Corpus Christi also looks like a team that probably could as far as smaller colleges go, do better than people might realize. I look at that game, and what I thought was interesting was that very clearly at some point you could see when Kelvin Sampson challenged somebody, right? The bigs got after it, but they didn't get combined for 30 points. Houston had 9 blocks as a team. Juwan Roberts and Javier Francis all over the boards. All those kinds of things were really, really great. I do think in looking at those kind of moments for the basketball program, and I'm losing people talking about basketball. What I will say as far as looking at those kind of things, the basketball program is, it looked like to me like you could tell once Kelvin Sampson had gotten after Juwan and Javier, because Tugler was out there and Arsenal were out there hustling, and he was ripping them on the bench, and they come in and light it up, right? Jamal Shedd must have gotten an earful at halftime. You see him at the halftime, played the second half like his hair was on fire, right? You could see those kinds of coaching moments. I think this team's really, really good and really, really interesting. I think we're going to know a lot more about them as we see what kinds of things they show on tape, and then see them play Xavier later this month, and then A&M as well, right? Xavier is a road game. A&M's technically a neutral site game. It's at Toyota Center, right? And so, while it is at least basketball season, I think that opens its own slew of questions. Now I feel much more confident about the direction of where that is, and I feel like I feel more confident, frankly, in how things are going and being Big 12 ready and all those kinds of other cliches, because I don't have big halves of wasted time. I don't have big stretches of wasted time. Even the Sweet 16 loss last year, which I'll admit was earlier than I thought they'd have lost in the tournament last year. Even the Sweet 16 loss last year, there was not a big moment, big stretches of the game. What are we doing? Whereas with this offense, as Apollos points out here, there were big stretches of the football game. There have been big stretches of most football games. What are we doing? Again, lack of coordination, lack of a system really seems to be biting us in the rear end here. Where do we go from here in just a football sense? Because I think people are going to basketball. Where do we go from here is I imagine Dana will say some cliche about flushing it and getting ready for Oklahoma State next Saturday. I would advise you to do the same. I'm going to have to rewatch this game to go back and dot my I's and cross my T's on exactly what happened, make sure I got everything right and all my, talking points crisp as we go throughout the week, because you guys tell me when I'm not. But that being, and I appreciate it. I'm not saying don't tell me that. With that said, though, I would not recommend watching that game again. Oklahoma State is beatable. They lost to South Alabama early in the season. They lost to UCF by a lot today, right? I'm going to have talked myself into by Friday that Houston has a path to victory in that game, and that there's a way to do it. And I'm going to find a way to do it. And that's probably the coach in me that always does that every week, right? But I'm going to have talked myself into that by Friday. And we'll talk along the way, and I'll hopefully convince you as well. And we'll go inside and do this whole thing again, because that's what sports are, folks. Is they're getting excited, anticipating, and then watching a bunch of college kids do whatever they're going to do. And sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. And then we regroup and we do it all over again. We're going to do it every day here at Locked On Cougs, each and every day. Thank you so much for tuning in to Cougars After Dark, the post-game show, wrapping up things on a Saturday full of football and basketball. I am still configuring, when it gets to the part of the year that is just basketball, how we're going to do these kinds of episodes. I like this. I like the interaction. I like the things we do here. I'll keep working on that on my end. If you got ideas, talk to me about things. Ooh, coaching recommendation of the football side of things. We got a Willie Fritz, Gary Patterson, Jeff Taylor. I don't care. Oh, these are not recommendations as much as just people you look at. We'll talk more. Here's my thought has been, because I think that's a conversation people are trying to have. And I am interested in that conversation if and when it happens. I want to make the kind of list when it happens. I don't want to get ahead of the ball there, right? Anyway, if you got ideas on when to do the post-game shows, how to do the post-game shows during basketball season, I also coach high school basketball, and so it's going to be really hard for me to do every single basketball game night because sometimes I have to watch the games late if they play the same time I'm coaching, right? But tell me what you think and tell me which ideas you got. Maybe we'll just do Saturday nights every Saturday night, and we'll recap live whatever's been going on. We'll see. It could be fun. Anyway, Locked On Cougs is your daily Houston Cougar podcast. We appreciate you tuning in, subscribing every day throughout a difficult football season. We're hoping it's a more fun basketball season and a much less difficult one because it's, frankly, going in a better direction. Again, subscribe, like, and comment so we know that you've been here. I think we're approaching 17. I think we're about at 1,700 subscribers. Trying to get 1,750 so we can get something away. Thank you all so much. Locked On Cougs is a primary Locked On Podcast Network, and that means your team, even in defeat, every day. Go Cougs.